Thank you for tuning in to Stampscaping 101. I'm using nature set number 1 here with a couple other stamps like the Solo Canoeist and my little tiny rocks here, but for the most part it's all coming off nature set number 1. These are some of my first stamps, pre-Stampscapes, that I incorporated back in with my own line of stamps. They first came out with a Stamp of the Hand company, and were my first attempts at modular stamping imagery, and it kind of followed with a previous set from, I don't know, maybe a year and a half before these ones came out, but they really worked well, and I don't know, I haven't been using them too much. I need to use them more, though. I used them a ton back then, maybe that's why, I don't know. But I'm just playing around with a lot of different aspects right here. I wouldn't call this a quick scene, but it came about fairly quickly, and I'll show you how to apply these different inks with your stylus tools. I used a little bit of the makeup sponge right here. And you'll see, when I apply it, just the similarities between these two and how you can interchange them and or incorporate those two types of applicators in together and use them for kind of the strengths that they have in terms of their different types of, I don't know, construction. Okay, but anyways, if you choose to watch this video, I hope you enjoy it. Drop us a note in the comments section if you have any questions at all. Okay, I thought I would do a scene using some of my firstborn, so to speak, stamps. These are stamps that came out with the Stamp of the Hand company years and years ago, probably around 1990 or so. They weren't my first nature set, but they were kind of the response to the very favorable response of another set, a precursor to these designs, and I don't know, I thought I would really kind of try to expand on that, I don't know, kind of a mini-series of releases, and this is what resulted. I really started kind of taking the modular aspect into consideration, which I did with the first one, but it was rather minimal. It was really conservative, kind of a I don't know, a response to that idea of modular stamping. Modular stamping had been done a little bit, but it wasn't done kind of extensively. There were series of designs from various companies, 3 or 4 images that might be released that were, could be used together. Primarily the industry were individual images, and people would just, they would shop across a lot of things, and, they would just put things together on their own, but most of the things weren't conceived to be used, in conjunction with other images. So this was my kind of attempt at that, and I can't remember if it took off quickly or not. It could have been the article that was like in Rubber Stamp Madness at the time, plus the live demonstrations that we were doing at, say, the Carson show. And back then, one, convention could be, kind of a very, I don't know, kind of have somewhat of an instantaneous response in terms of kind of the public's, awareness of a given line or technique, because everyone was going to that show back then. People were flying out from, Japan, Australia, buyers, if you were, you had a store, you wanted to, get into rubber stamping. People were having, I don't know, trips, kind of, stores or businesses out in foreign countries might arrange, a kind of a trip to the States to go to, say, the Carson show. It was to do other things, but I remember specifically a group from Australia out here. But I'd see foreign buyers and whatnot coming by the show all the time. And then, of course, anything in Rubber Stamp Madness back then. That was kind of your window to the entire industry in many ways. There were a couple other publications as well that were, well known. I don't know, National Stampographing, maybe it was a little bit more regional. Vamp Stamp News was a magazine. Maybe some of you who are watching this would recognize that name, but that was a real kind of stamper magazine. It was almost like a zine, or something like that. Real fandom. I mean, Rubber Stamp Madness was too. They weren't like corporate America or anything like that. Rubber stamping in general is a small community, but Vam Stamp News was another one of those entities, and another magazine. So, this was really early on. So, it wasn't that hard to kind of get the word out, in other words. And there were some online entities as well, but I don't know. That's my long way of saying somehow word got around about kind of this modular system of stamps from a Stamp in the Hand company, and pretty soon over time you really started to see more and more people starting to order that. Okay, now I don't have the names for these. I mean, we call them something at a Stamp in the Hand, but I've kind of come to I don't know, I just released these in sets. It was at a time when Stamp in the Hand started coming out with these other types of images, going back to their, it was like a lot of pairs in their cool kind of eraser carving style of stamps that were going over enormously. So they just kind of discontinued a lot of my older designs, which was fine with me because I had already started Stampscapes at that time, and I just released these in sets for myself then. Okay, so what I've done is I've inked these impressions up, but then I've gone in, and if you can see, there's some slight variations of green within that black. It's very subtle. It's very subtle for me right in front of it too. I can see a little bit of a very dark kind of a olivey green. This might even be olive green right here, but combined with the black, it just forms kind of a deeper, richer black, in my opinion. There's some slight nuances in it. It's one of those subtle things that does not take a long time to do, but it can yield some nice results. Okay, so I was kind of thinking about going with that bleed-proof white on there. I'm not sure if I'm going to do that. I kind of like this airiness to this one right here, so... Okay, so just going off very lightly, that black of mine is fairly wet, okay, that black pad, so I'm getting a slight bit of bleeding, so I'm going to use kind of more of a tapping motion right here, so I'm not dragging this and smearing, okay? Now, this is adding it in a very kind of light touch, okay? And what I'll do is I'll kind of just go for a little bit more of a kind of a pastel type of appearance to the end result. Yeah, I really wanted to go with some more of that splatter painting technique, kind of in a snowy terrain. Some people are already getting around to Christmas cards, Christmas in summer or whatever you call it. So I was thinking, maybe we can do some of that. That's really getting ahead of the curve. If you're doing your Christmas cards, you're even ahead of like Costco, in your preparation. Okay. All right. This is just using Pear Tart, okay? Pear Tart Memento. Now, I think there was something else in this tip right here. Maybe it was a darker green or something like that. But I'm getting a fairly wide range of values with this, okay? Part of that is control over how much you tap. If I just tap it out like that, it's very light, right? But then if you go multiple times, with a little bit more pressure, you're squeezing out more ink, and it gets darker, so you can really get a lot of mileage, I always say, out of your inks, because you can always take something that's dark and make it lighter, and you can always take something that's very bright and make it duller, so you can have, you know, I mean, if it's not a dark color, it's not going to get dark, you know, if you put 1,000 layers on it, you know, if I can tap this forever, it's not going to turn to black or something like that, but it'll get as dark as a full saturation of that will allow, and it will get as bright as this color, but the less you tap it down, the duller in intensity it will be. Okay, so you can really get a full spectrum of those types of things, aspects of those different aspects of color. Okay, let's go to bamboo leaves. All I'm doing is I'm just getting a little bit darker. Okay, so we've achieved a nice range of pear tart with this color. We'll do the same thing with bamboo leaves. So if I've left some areas light with pear tart, the first color, kind of your base coat as I refer to it, what you'll do is you just kind of do the same thing with your next color. And then when we start moving off into kind of the darker hues, maybe you kind of reserve those applications for kind of your darker areas, typically like things like shadows or whatever. Okay. Okay, and there's a little bit of shadows in the design itself, so what I'm doing is I'm just going in, and what I always say, I just kind of reiterate what's going on in the shadows with my inks. Darker areas on the design, I tap a little bit of that ink in those areas to kind of reinforce those shaded areas, and maybe some of the areas that are a little bit lighter on the design, I'll just, you know, retain that lightness. Okay, that was it with that one. Here's a cottage ivy. It's a little bit of a darker green, kind of a foresty green maybe, or something like that. You can tell it's a little bit brighter in intensity than the other two, as well as being darker, okay? So remember, what I always say is brighter does not mean lighter, okay? Brighter is a matter of intensity. Often your darker colors or colors in the shadows are the brightest colors within, you know, within a given color scheme. You know, kind of it goes to say that, you know, like kind of like on an overcast day, you know, the colors are much more vibrant than, say, high noon on a very light day. Bright and sunny, you know, the colors get washed out a little bit. In that full sunlight, so. Anyways, can you see what's starting to happen here? We have these different nuances. The difference between coloring and coloring for lighting is just the retention of some areas and leaving them a little bit lighter, okay? And where you do that, it really doesn't matter. Just kind of oscillate it. You know, have some areas a little bit lighter and transitioning into areas that are a little bit darker. Okay, so that is my greens. 3 greens there. We have a nice full range of values in there. One of the things that I like in my grassy areas, sometimes they are too green. It looks kind of weird, doesn't it? You know, in terms of, I don't know, I wouldn't say realism, because nothing we do is really real here, but see that kind of more earthy brown that's added in there. It kind of gives it a little bit of a glow, doesn't it? But doesn't that look kind of nicer? Something like a distress ink, you know, any of those distress ink colors, antique linen, old paper, I think it is. You know, those lighter shades, and, you know, a lot of you have, you know, various distress inks that you use. Just add that right into it. Really super hot red sunsets or something like that. Add kind of a warmish tone, tinge into it. See that right there? See what a difference that makes? All right. That's a Memento Desert Sand. Okay. All right, let's switch tips here and move over to a clean tip, I should say. Okay, let's look at the sky in here. Okay, and here's the color I'm looking for, this summer sky. Let me take some of this ink off the top here. Oh, that's really wet. I left a big fingerprint there. See that Memento? It really allows you to kind of spread the ink around. It's very, very slippery. In fact, when I used just a re-inker and slathered it in there, it really separated because it doesn't really absorb into the paper very quickly. In fact, those re-inkers, it seems to do even, I don't know, less kind of absorption than what I'm typically used to with Memento. I wonder if they changed the kind of the chemistry of it or the viscosity slightly. I don't know. I mean, I think it's still good. You can bring some of this down into your greens, you know what I mean? This is a very light color, so there's no worries about it in terms of, you know, giving you some sort of a mark that you really don't want. I'm just going for, you know, basically some saturation. That's really, really light there. I don't know. Maybe some of that re-inker fluid that I took off the top of it. It might have been an aqua ocean, I mean, not seashells, but Adirondack lights. Okay, this is Bahama Blue. See that? Just kind of blend it in there, and it blends beautifully because I have that kind of foundation color that's down there. And look at that kind of variation down here. There's the same thing going on up here. See, it's streaking across like that. Or you can, if you're doing it with makeup sponges, you just dab it in there. Makeup sponges are not a different technique, you know. You're doing kind of layered colors over the top of one another, you know. If I go like this with this makeup sponge, you know what I mean? It's not like, oh my gosh, this is like a really different technique or something like that. You can do that, okay? My suggestion for you is not to think of different media or applicators, you know, media for sure, but applicators. Don't think of applicators as something like, okay, now we're going to do makeup sponges for this whole scene, okay? Okay, now we're using sponges or something like that. You use the tool that kind of fits the application purpose, okay? And whatever suits best, you know. If you're painting a house, you know, I don't think you would do like a trim brush on, you know, like for walls or something like that, for vast walls in your ceiling or something like that. You use a roller, right? Or, you know, you have it sprayed. Some of you were saying, hey, I just hire someone. I don't, you know, paint at all, right? But whatever they would use, okay? And you use, you know, things for corners and whatnot, you know? I would say experiment around and use things for what you want. If I want a heavy saturation of something, I like something that's a little bit more absorbent. But this does have this beautiful kind of powdery type of look. If you want a real soft application, I really like it for kind of a vignette and kind of a powdery type of touch that you can put onto it. And why is that? Because these are individual tiny little hairs, right? And it's a very soft application, right? That's why they're makeup brushes. You don't want this big streak and slathering of it that you might get from, you know, a caked up, you know, very saturated sponge. So you use a brush. Use smaller brushes for smaller portions, you know. And no, I don't wear makeup, but at least that's what I'm guessing, you know, those are for. You know, in terms of the things that'll suit it best. One of my favorite applications for those makeup sponges like that, though, are for those vignettes on the perimeter right there. You know, when I want kind of this really soft application on the perimeter. But as you can see, you know, it worked, you know, really good on here, too. If I want a little bit of a stronger saturation, then like I said, having something that's absorbent like this, I can put a big slathering, right? And that spreads out like that. See how that works? Maybe on some matte paper that's going to be taking the ink faster and absorbing it because it is not, it doesn't have a glossy coating, then maybe, you know, different types of brushes would work really good. But use certain things, you know, use certain things. See this as just kind of a blank canvas, and you're going to use it for what you want. Even painters who are doing things like canvas paintings, you're not really going to utilize, you know, the same brush that you would apply your gesso on the canvas, you know, in terms of kind of detailed areas within your painting. So really find out what you like and what works best for you, and to incorporate it into your methodology. And I think you'll come up with some really great combinations of things that work for you and kind of the aesthetics that you're going after. All right, this is a yellow-green. It's looking a little anemic to me, even though it looks okay. But let's try some of this, okay? You see that intensity there? How it really brightens up right there? I just used it right there, but you can see the difference between up there and down here. And this is where Marvy comes in handy, okay? Marvy's colors can give you kind of a really bright intensity, all right? But I don't like everything to be so hot and intense. That's why I kind of added in that brown. So you add that little bit of intensity like that, and that really serves the scene nicely because we've extended the range of intensity out. Okay, let's see. This was the Danube blue, but let's go back to this Caribbean blue, okay? So we just combine certain types of inks too for the combination that'll serve us well in what we're going after, okay? So maybe in my water I want things a little bit brighter in areas. Maybe I don't want the whole thing too bright, you know, because it looks too hot and intense, but this will provide a really nice color for that. Okay, let's go to a blue right here. It's a little bit of a darker blue. See that right there? And I'll just kind of go up there in my corners like so. Okay. It's kind of like a, you know, kind of getting into that lazy afternoon kind of time frame in this. This is an even darker blue. I found a really fantastic blue in the Blueprint sketch. It's called Distress Ink. That one's really fantastic. It's real similar to this Prussian blue in terms of, here it is right here actually, Distress Ink. Fantastic, and it kind of has this cool kind of separation. It was kind of shocking to see it when I applied it just with the, you know, my brush right over the top of my scene, because it really separated, but I think it's a really fascinating kind of a characteristic of that color that I'm going to have to try and incorporate in with the scene. Okay, so there we have that, and let's go with some kind of darker trees on here. And I have these two different trees in this set. I'm trying to remember if I remember drawing these trees. Back when we were coming up with designs for Stamp the Hand, you know, it wasn't stuff that I wasn't like a full-time designer. No one was there. You know, they would typically put a call out for designs. Okay, guys, and this is after I was designing for them for a while. I didn't design anything for, I don't know, probably a year or something like that. They didn't even know I drew. I think they knew I was an art student, but I was just kind of doing help with production and going to different shows. I'm stamping this in a VersaFine because it's VersaFine is a super dark black ink. I really love it. You got to give it time to dry though, that's for sure. But yeah, you know, they would put out a call for designs and say something like, okay, we wanted to release some new designs. You guys got 2 weeks to come up with something, so I was a full-time student, so, you know, I don't know, in my spare time, I just started working on some designs, and you never knew what they were going to accept. You know, I didn't want to put too. I put as much time into it as I could, and you know, you always try to do your best, but you never knew what designs you were going to do. So in some ways, at times, you don't want to put in too much time in this. They said, okay, we'll just take these 3 designs, and that design that you took, you know, 5 hours on or something like that, which was a lot for me back then when I was, you know, a student. You know, you didn't want that to happen, so. Okay, I can put some other things like this pine bow coming in here, but I think I like that as is. Alright. But there is one of my first foreign imagery. It's kind of interesting watching that develop. Okay, I'm going to incorporate some new stamp into it too, just a little bit of texture, okay? This is my Tiny Rocks. It's one of my favorite designs, but if I just kind of add that in there as a little bit of texture, it's picking up a little bit of that black from there, but that's okay because I can have some of that in that mix, but it adds a little bit of texturing down in that water. I like to add kind of submerged imagery, and that would kind of represent some things submerged. So what you're doing is instead of having kind of a water surface, you have kind of a clear water in there, or that's depicting clear water. Okay, so let's add in a little bit of visual interest into this meadow and whatnot. And here we have a lot of open area. It would be the perfect place for some little types of critters or something like that, but I think you get the idea here. I happen to love kind of like springtime flowers. Sometimes it's late summer in the higher elevations. You know, you can get kind of some cool colors. And this might represent, like in the hills here, these little white flowers. They call them pearly everlasting. And I'm just kind of putting little, you know, kind of areas of them right in here and there. I can change colors, and I really like color in this area too. You know, lupin and purple lupin and poppies and, you know, whatever colors, so whatever kind of wildflowers you might have in your state, kind of in this given type of terrain, go ahead and add those ones in there. It makes it kind of more personalized, having that type of situation in your given scenes, you know, kind of bringing it, you know, a little bit closer to home. And a little sparkles in my water down here, if you can see those. Okay, but see those right in there? Doesn't that kind of bring that to life a little bit? Okay, and I tell you what, let me go get another stamp. I think we have a fantastic stage that's set here for something, but what that might be, let me go see. Okay, let's use the Solo Canoeist. It just happens to be one of the first ones that I saw. Let's go with the VersaFine again. I already added that, those little highlights down in that area. Let's go with the VersaFine. Okay, I could go with the Marvy, but the not the VersaFine, but the gel pen has already been laid down here. Sometimes if I use dye-based ink over the top of the gel pen kind of shows through because it's kind of paint-like, even, you know, it's water-based, but I just have the feeling that the VersaFine is going to give me much more coverage over the top of that. So, you know, because the VersaFine is a pigment ink, okay, and pigment inks kind of stay on the surface. They stain your surface, but the pigment ink, or let me backtrack there. The pigment ink stays on the surface, okay? It stays on the surface. It doesn't penetrate and stain. That's the way they make imprints, okay? But dye-based inks stain, okay? They stain something, so they're kind of absorbing and whatnot. So anyway, so I get a nice black, crisp impression of it without little white dots showing through. Okay. So that is that. I'm wondering if I want to add anything else. I am not calling this a quick scene, but it is a fairly quick one to do. But I want to keep those quick scenes around the 15-minute mark. So that being said, let's see if I should add anything else into here. Let's add a little slight tinge of another glow, maybe. Oh, let me see. Let's take this antique linen here. Okay. And I'm going to add that to the sky. Just like that. The pink would be better, but let's just go with that. You see that little warmth up there? Let's backtrack out of it. See, doesn't it changes it, doesn't it, slightly? Isn't there a slight glow? I wouldn't want it too much more orangey because it's all blue in there, but when you go with something fairly light, like this, okay? I mean, that's used in its full saturation there, but if you're just kind of doing a little wipe, you're not applying a thick layer of it in there, but see that little glow in there? And then see this down here in the water. Let's add a slight tinge of that glow. I gotta be careful that I don't go over the top of my pigment ink pine trees because they are wet right now and will smear for sure if I color over them. Okay, I guess something like that. I think I'm smeared a little bit of that black in there, but it's a little bit of a warm glow right there. Okay. So, when I'm talking about that warm glow, I'm talking about I just tweaked my temperature slightly in there. Okay, now let's see. Silver. Clear. Wink of Stella. I come across all these things, and before I kind of incorporate it into my technique a lot, you know, and it's a slow kind of process for me to kind of add that into kind of what I'm doing consistently, because I tend to forget about it a lot of times. But that Wink of Stella is that kind of that glitter paintbrush, I guess, or whatever you call it. I guess, right? It's glitter. People told me about that in Mesa, Arizona. Thank you. A lot of people were picking up and thinking, what is that? So, oh, I don't know, it's right in there a little bit. You can kind of see it, not really. I need to shake this up and apply a little. I can see it right here. Well, yeah, okay, I can see it now. Let's see if I get that. Do you see? I don't know. It's subtle. I can see it more like close up. You can kind of see it come alive like that. But see, I put it in the that lightest area right in there. Okay, now I've added that little solo canoeist, and can you see those little striations down there on the design? Let me reiterate that. Okay, with some of these little dots down here. I put the shadow in there for you, but you're gonna have to, if you want to add in these little dots to put the highlight, you know, that would accompany that shadow on the top ends of that shadow, then you can do that. Alright, so a few highlights in here. Let me put a few more highlights back here. Okay, now I need to do this, since I am no longer under the gun with the quick scene. I can do a 2-minute application of my pigment ink here. This one's a Hero Arts. I'm using my Hero Arts one a lot. I don't know. I've been using, saying, Colorbox white, you know, frost white pigment ink for years now. I don't know, maybe I'm just tired of saying I still have all those and they work just fine, but let's add in a little bit of a kind of a variation, a little change in texture here, and adding this little mist type of effect. You want to kind of blot this off and go for a little bit of a more of a dry brushing touch to the application than kind of a wet slathering of it. And I know your white pads out there, if they're like mine, I don't know, maybe you're using yours a lot, but I don't use mine a lot. I use the process a lot, but I don't use a lot of ink because I'm just barely applying kind of a drier brushed application of it. Okay, watch out for those trees. See, I'm kind of obscuring a lot of things that are down there in kind of that foggy mist. Now I can put some of it up in these trees right here. So quite often things in the distance are a little bit lighter. Okay, so maybe it's you know, a matter of using value to represent distance. You know, I could have kind of blotted some of those trees off too before I stamped them. They would be gray and I wouldn't have to do this. But, you know, I'm kind of just doing this after the fact. You know, you can kind of do things and then decide later on how you want it to look in terms of value to some extent. If it was really dark up there, this kind of looks weird. What this looks like now is it looks like, you know, where there's lighter areas that you've retained in your scene. What I'm saying is that there's some kind of moisture in the air in terms of fog or mist or whatever. And it's being illuminated by that lighting in there. So if you've kept some areas a little bit light, you can put this in there. But if they go too dark, you're saying that, you know, there's basically no light in that area. And sometimes it looks a little weird. Unless you're doing kind of a Halloween, kind of spooky, you know, foggy night type of thing, you know. Then it kind of seems appropriate, you know, because it looks like a kind of a monster movie or something like that with stage lighting. Okay, so anyways, you see that right there? Isn't that kind of fun, adding that little touch in there? I would do it around this, but that Canoeist is really very wet right now, so touching that would not be advised. Okay, so see some of those trees in the background. Doesn't it look more dimensional that way? Simple technique. Can push, you know, suddenly you've pushed your distance. You've pushed texture, because this area in here looks a lot softer now, doesn't it? So you have crisp trees to contrast against softer trees. You have darker trees against lighter trees. You have near trees, very crisp, and kind of obscure trees, which are very far. So there's all kinds of things you're doing when you're doing something like this. It's really fun for things like stars and making stars glow and stuff like that. Not for this time of day here, but I don't know, you could. But anyways, just a fun little scene using nature set number 1 plus a couple, you know, additional stamps. But just a fun little scene to do. And like I said, I kind of kept it within this set for the most part. I have to use some more of those sometime and kind of create this lake a little bit bigger. I should do 11 by 17. I once did a 8.5 by 11 with these stamps right here. I'll have to try it on a 11 by 17 sometime using what I call my firstborn stamps. Okay, so thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, drop us a note in the comments section.